I am the recruitment business partner here at Domino's, and that's Domino's Pizza UK and Ireland. So we are not responsible for the recruitment of the shops and our franchisees, but for head office in Milton Keynes, and then our 5 supply chain centres, which are across the country. So one up in Scotland, Warrington in the north, Milton Keynes, which is our main hub next to our head office, Avonmouth, which is a distribution centre, and then we have Naas in the Republic of Ireland, which covers the island of Ireland. And so my responsibility is managing a team of recruitment specialists who are responsible, like I said, for all the hiring across those areas, perm and contract.
Obviously covering quite a large remit there and geographically quite large. I'm imagining you're seeing quite a few challenges in the market at the moment. How do you see the recruitment landscape as is at present?
Start with a very broad question. I think it's probably the challenge I think a lot of businesses are facing, in that, broadly speaking, I think there's a perception that this is a buyer's market, in terms of you'd rather be an employer than an employee, or potential employee. Actually, in certain pockets, and say that be digital, certain tech roles, certain engineering type roles as well, actually that demand outweighs the availability in the market. So I think generally, yes, there's a lot of people available and good people available, but actually in certain pockets, and especially if you then need real specialists, need real domain knowledge or market knowledge and stuff like that, that can be really narrow, and you're fishing in very small pools of talent, I think.
Have you seen that the market's sort of almost led to you having to change your approach to recruitment, given that sort of those smaller pools for those talent sort of positions, but also the wider labour pool that's available?
Yes, I think as an organisation, we have probably over the last 12 months taken a much more proactive approach to attraction than maybe we had in the past. I think what we have always had, fortunately, is a very strong consumer brand, and that's obviously helped us attract talent. But actually, the focus over the last 12 months, and I think going forward over the next couple of years as well, will be really driving that employer brand, and that's across talent or across certain skills and that sort of thing, but also, to the point I made earlier, across certain geographies, right? Often in the pockets that we are in those supply chain centres, we're one of a number of similar type organisations that operate in that space, that broadly speaking, there's a relatively small range of pay rates within that. So you really need to differentiate yourself by how you treat your employees, what the give and the get of working in an organisation like Domino's. So I think that's definitely been a change for us. I think we're probably behind maybe where other organisations are from that employer brand and proactive piece, but we're looking to catch up in the next few years.
So would it be fair to say that obviously with the introduction of the NI contributions increase and then the changes to national living wage for those more sort of manual type roles in your supply chain, that they're creating more competition now because you're more aligned with those competitors, so your brand has to take more of a forefront?
I think we're always relatively competitive, but it's one of those things that at that level often, 10p, 20p an hour people are more price sensitive at that range potentially than at more senior levels. So I think we've always been a fair payer. So I don't think it's a massive thing for us in that perspective, but I appreciate that natural competition is created by having to be competitive, and as everyone's rates slightly increase, and obviously the contributions change and that kind of thing. Yeah, I think that's a natural change that will occur.
Talking of those natural changes, do you foresee any changes coming to those sort of more entry-level roles, with obviously the introduction of new improved day one rights for the employee?
So look, what I don't know is kind of definitively our approach as an organisation to that. So I'll talk maybe slightly more holistically, and kind of from a personal view of what I think how the market will adjust. And the truth is, I think organizations will be cautious, I think, especially initially of how they hire and kind of, whilst you might just hire kind of a bit more freely, I think they're and maybe this is and that's not necessarily the wrong thing to do, but more consideration about the volumes that you need to hire, think more about your workforce plan and what that looks like over a 12, 24-month period, rather than maybe what we see is a little bit of a hire and fire approach just to deal with peaks. And then again, obviously, how we then utilize non-permanent workers, vendors to maybe plug and augment some of those gaps that we have. So repeat myself, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. If we take it back to our industry, there was a lot of hiring in 2021 coming out of that pandemic. And then we saw probably in 2022, 2023, and even going into last year, kind of redundancies because of that approach, right? People saw a short-term need, hired heavily, and then had to exit those people. And, that's probably not sustainable in any organization and in any sector. So, a little bit of consideration, looking a bit more creative with how you bring on resource is not necessarily a bad thing. I know from a maybe a larger economic agenda, and I'm by no means an expert in this. The word we hear a lot is growth, right? And again, I'm no expert in that either, but it feels like maybe it might stagnate growth a bit as these organizations, especially those SME type organizations, are more reticent in hiring, aren't able to match some of those day one, or aren't able to ensure that they can match those day one rights. So they make a choice not to hire as many people, etc. And then so yeah, there are those knock-on effects potentially, but actually, as the market adjusts, maybe kind of how we approach bringing on talent will change.
So you obviously you brought me into my next question really nicely there, but you said about the approach to bringing on that talent. Can you see there being more of a shift away from sort of your more traditional, let's say, competency recruitment to sort of skills-based recruitment, whereby you're actually looking at a more holistic view of the candidate, given that the new day one rights are almost, could probably be argued to be more of an extended probation type period, but with more robustness around it, isn't it?
Yeah, well, exactly. And so, yes, I think around that I think skills-based hiring is a thing that a lot of organizations want to do or think they want to do. It requires, I guess, a fundamental shift in how you think and how you bring on people, and challenging, obviously, the most senior and the most experienced type of hirers to start with. So yes, again, I think, yes, I don't think it's going to be an immediate thing. So I don't think in 2025 we're going to see a huge amount of shift by most people hiring. I think it'll be in pockets. I think it will be in some forward-thinking organizations and some leaner organizations that are able to do that. I think that, but I think as the way of the world and the way of working changes, and we see a shift with things like AI and that sort of thing, taking away certain roles and creating roles that we don't even know about now.
Yeah.
That my hope is that the organizations are going to be built in a certain way or think in a certain way, that actually how can we redeploy some of this skill, and so actually skills-based hiring starts potentially internally, right? And actually, what are some of the skills that we can skill people that we can retrain into other types of roles? And then I think that the natural flow of that is into how they hire externally. So yeah. I think that kind of looking at talent a bit more holistically, right? And talent acquisition, talent development, talent management, kind of working much more hand in glove than certainly it was 10 years ago, when there was TA function or recruitment function in the business and the L&D function in the business, which weren't necessarily aligned in the same way. I think that's already moved.
Yeah, so more of a more holistic view of that person coming into the business, a bit more succession planning and sort of skills development from there is probably the way forward, do you think?
Yes, yeah, exactly. And like I said, thinking, but yeah, that skills-based hiring piece is, again, like I said, I think it's getting that blend right between what you need now and what you need to be delivered, what the skills you need versus what are the technical things that you need to do the business, and the behaviours, competencies, etc.
Yeah. I'm going to ask you, it's potentially a leading question, but I think it's probably a fair one to ask, and that is, do you think that there's some education to do in the TA space around skills-based recruitment? Because I think you see that there is a movement towards that, but it has been seen in certain organizations, and if you read sort of like the Glassdoor forums, it actually can sometimes just be competency-based recruitment, but just relabeled.
Oh, absolutely. I think it's certainly a buzzword in our space at the moment. And I'll actually even myself, I'm not a expert in that. So but I can understand the value of that. So I think a big part of it is defining what it actually means, and it not just being, to your point, a relabeling of something that already exists. I totally agree with that.
You touched upon AI, and I think that's probably a really good segue into it as well. And I think you sort of touched upon this as well. So there's some recent articles that said in 2030, for example, 30% of job titles that are around at the moment won't be around in 2030. Does that really has that thinking started with you internally at the moment, in terms of, that shift is naturally going to happen, or is it more of a reactive shift as that technology develops?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, because there's only so much value in being super proactive with it, isn't there? I think the proactivity needs to be in understanding that it's going to come, rather than necessarily taking huge amounts of action right now to mitigate that, because 2030 is still a relatively long time away. In some aspects, obviously, in that some aspects it's not. So, but yeah, I think I think it all fits in with that employer brand piece as well, right? So, and how you look after your talent and your people is, as long as, again, from my thinking, we need to as we identify those shifts, we need to get better at workforce planning to understand. Again, workforce planning is potentially a similar thing to skills-based hiring was. It's just a word that people like to use, but actually, are you truly workforce planning versus demand planning, which is an equally important and challenging exercise, which is kind of understanding what you need over, say, a 6 to 12 month period, versus workforce planning, which is thinking, what are the skills that we need to be able to deliver a business strategy over a 5-6 year period. So to your question, I'll be honest, in my thinking, I'm not thinking about kind of skills for 2030 right now, but it's the kind of thinking that we want to start thinking about as an organization, so that we have the tools in place, the ways of working in place, and the kind of education of the business in place to kind of be able to do that, I think.
I completely agree. I think I worked in public and private sector, and the public sector very good at workforce planning, and the private sector being very good at demand planning. But there needs to be almost a combined hybrid approach, doesn't there, to make sure that you're coming off what you need.
You can't have one without. Yeah, to be effective, you need both.
So AI, are you seeing AI becoming more prevalent in your day-to-day recruitment activities?
I think we use it as a team to maybe help us with some of our copy, to maybe initiate some ideas and thinking and that sort of thing. But actually, what we're not using it for at the moment is anything particularly. Nothing decision based at the moment, and I think that's a conscious choice. And we don't need to right now. We don't want to, because we don't know about the inherent biases, etc., that might sit in that. So, what it's useful for us to do is to kind of some ideation, like I said, for copy, which is not naturally the skills that, as TA specialists in my team, that won't always be what the background that they've come from, right? To write brilliant copy in a job advert, for example, or to start thinking about a training module or something like that. So in that aspect, it's really useful. I think I can clearly see what the power of it is, and for me, it will always be about reducing the admin burden on a TA team, so that they can have a much higher touch service to both our candidate population and our hiring managers and leaders. I think what it can also do, someone that is keen in looking into data, it's all that stuff. I'd say intermediate on Excel, right? But actually, AI giving you the opportunity to plug in a lot of raw data and it come back to you with brilliant stuff. In something, Excel is very powerful, even if you're intermediate at it, but it can, something that takes you an hour could take 5 minutes potentially in AI. So for me, those are in the immediate term, the big value piece for me.
Yep.
I think when we spoke earlier, one of my challenges, one of the challenges of AI will come is, across all sectors, we talk about it taking a lot of that administrative admin burden type activity out. But often that's where you plug in some of the more junior talent and more entry level talent. And that's the breeding ground to then build your future business partners, leaders, managers, whatever. So once you take out that layer, how are you hiring those people and how are people learning? I'm sure there'd be a different way around to it, but I think again in the short term, I think that is I think a concern. I think when I say we don't use AI prevalently, I think maybe that's a little bit of naivety on my side as well, because even something like LinkedIn Recruiter, it's got AI, even without us knowing really. We know, but it's using AI to help us refine searches, suggest us based on previous searches, suggest people we want to. So it would be unfair to say that we're not using it, but we haven't procured any specialist AI technology to kind of enable us to do our jobs.
Yeah. To go back to your point around potential bias being created by AI, I think my viewpoint on AI coming from an assessment design perspective is that AI is great for more potentially the transactional elements, but you do also need a bit of EI, some emotional intelligence involved in assessment. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think so. I think assessment's always this. It's a very difficult one, isn't it? Because when I've done design assessments or deliver training around that, you want to take out gut feel and you want to take out all those biases, whether that be affinity bias, halo bias, whatever, all those unconscious biases that we have. But that doesn't necessarily mean you want to take out, to your point, EQ, right? So, but it's a really interesting one. More to think, maybe not answering the question, but just pondering kind of assessment more generally in the world of kind of AI. But no, I think I'd agree. I'd be very concerned about an assessment tool that was used exclusively as a kick out to make a decision. I think there's value, and as they always have been, even in a pre-AI world, I think they can add a real insight and can be a build on something. But as a kick out, it would be dangerous.
Yeah, no, absolutely agree.
And I think again, some of the stuff that we talk about with AI and skill matching, it's not that new. So if I think about something like CV parsing and searching databases, it's happened ever since I was in the recruitment sector. So that was 2012, maybe 2011. And so I know it's moved on a step from that, and I appreciate that it's slightly different, but kind of skill matching based on things that appear on the CV isn't completely revolutionary and isn't completely kind of unheard of. Do you know what I mean? And it's kind of what's bedrock of kind of some of the places has been for a long time and building their databases and all that sort of thing.
Yeah. When you think of the old Boolean searches and that sort of stuff which are designed to pick up those key terms, it's AI essentially rebranded, isn't it? In those respects, yeah. Do you or have you indeed seen a change in candidate behaviour with the adoption of AI?
Yeah, I think there is. So if I look the other way, there's definitely opportunities for people to apply to, I think, multiple hundred jobs simultaneously. Now, again, we haven't got anything that like AI beta type beta ER as opposed to BETA to do that. So I don't think I can necessarily tell. Potentially, will you see an increase in applications from other countries, etc. In certain areas? But I don't think it's been a massive issue for us. But I know that exists, and that sort of thing. There's a bit of a war around AI, isn't there? Because kind of employers feel that it's unfair if candidates use AI to spruce up their CV or whatever, and then kind of job seekers think it's unfair if AI is used to make decisions around hiring and stuff. And it's quite, I don't necessarily have an answer to it, but I think it's quite an interesting kind of battle. And I'm fairly, truthfully, I'm fairly ambivalent to both. I think, you make a decision around the tools that you want to use. I don't see anything wrong with someone using AI to improve their CV. Again, like I said, the market is such in certain sectors that use it. It's a bit of a volume game, right? So we need to create as TA experiences that make people not necessarily want to use the AI tool, and actually they apply to the jobs they want to apply to. But I guess that's not necessarily what we are at the minute.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you think there's an argument, and I'm sort of particularly passionate about EDI and social mobility and that sort of thing. Do you think there's an argument with AI and with its probably shift towards paid for models that could potentially have a detrimental impact on certain candidate demographics?
Yeah, I think that's, it becomes the next kind of badge, of being able to afford something, right? So whether that in the past it might be university or private school or whatever, but actually if you've got access to you paid for models of AI. What I would say is, in reality, though, that the cost of an AI type solution versus CV writing coaches versus going to university versus being able to do an MBA is actually less. So will AI democratize some of this a little bit more and actually give opportunities to people that, say whose parents' first language isn't English, so they can't help them with their CV, or don't go to a good school with a careers advisor who could help them with that sort of thing. So, you can see kind of unfortunately, with every answer about AI, it's kind of, it's conflict, isn't it? Whether, there's dangers that come with it, but there's also opportunities that come with it, I think. So yeah, I can see it. I can see it working both ways.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head when you said about there's so many different views around AI, isn't it? And it's so opinion splitting. In one hand, you'll get employers say that, well, actually, we're not going to allow you to use it during the assessment process, but they'll probably allow daily use of it in the.
I think and I think that, but again, that's happened. That's happened for years, right? So if I use the example of an Excel test, right? An Excel test is, we might conduct under kind of test conditions in inverted commas, where you do it live and you have 20 minutes to do it. But then you're not allowed to use anything else. You're not allowed to look at a book or your notes or Excel or Google. But the truth is, in your day-to-day life, if you don't know how to do something, even before AI, I remember when I was at my master university, one of the lecturers said, the truth is, if you can't find the answer from Google, it's because you've asked the wrong question. And so maybe that's not quite true, but broadly speaking, for someone in relatively straightforward line of work like me, if I don't know how to do something, I can find the answer on you, not just in my professional life, but in my personal life. But that will be punished in an assessment process, right? If someone had a second screen looking at some notes or some answers or some research that they've done. But again, it's a bit about education, right? I think sometimes we have that school approach to interviews and it becomes a bit of a memory test and a bit draconian, where actually it's completely devoid from what people do at work on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah. Do you think there's an argument that technology can actually support certain candidate groups? So obviously neurodiverse candidates, there's a lot of awareness around preparation and allowing the adequate, reasonable adjustments, that sort of thing. Do you think the technology can actually aid in the process then?
Yeah, you'd like to think so, wouldn't you? I think already, just in terms of accessibility, it's allowing it to do that. I think, if you think about diversity and equity in particular, even the fact that so many interviews are conducted remotely now is I don't think we appreciate the kind of the shift, even in the last 5 years post pandemic, that we haven't been, we kind of maintained that, right? You can probably go through most stages of interview in a lot of companies and not meet anyone before you start your job. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. I'm sure there's some drawbacks for both parties in that. But I think broadly speaking, I see it as a benefit. It speeds the process along. People with childcare issues, people with general care issues, with mobility issues don't have to worry about the cost. Another thing, you'd have to commute into 5 or 6 job interviews whilst you're job hunting, right? And you might not be earning. So I think we're already seeing technology and doing that. And yes, you'd like to think it can only, as we use more digital tools to do some of this, I think, there's no reason why it shouldn't. I think a really interesting assessment thing I think John Lewis did it, is around sharing interview questions before.
Yeah.
And I think it's a really interesting one, because I think for neurodiverse people, potentially, but just for people generally, it just shifts what an interview is.
Changes the mindset, doesn't it?
It completely changes the mindset and rewards preparation in a much more tangible way. I know people that have done loads of preparation just because they've prepped on the wrong thing.
Yeah,
they've not been penalised, but they haven't done as well as maybe they could have. And I was talking to a friend of mine. I think he was interviewed, and he works broadly in finance, right, and done a load of research into kind of the business, share price, etc., etc.
Yeah.
And it just wasn't. That's not what the interview was about. It was about what he forgot, and maybe naively was about him and kind of and all that stuff. So, but you could go the other way and be wrong as well, right? So I think it's a really interesting thing to go on. It would really change the mindset for everyone. I think it would change the mindset for the hirers as well, and really focusing what you're trying to get from these people in these interviews. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. The John Lewis approach almost sort of laser focuses the candidate approach, doesn't it? And the candidate knows exactly, they're asking me this, I can go away and prepare relevant, as opposed to almost prepping in the dark as such, isn't it?
Yeah, but also, like I said, I think it also laser focuses the assessor in what am I actually trying to find out? Like I said, I think the biggest mistake we make is thinking interviews, in particular memory tests, when they're just not.
Yeah. I think sometimes, I don't know if you agree with this, but I find that there's also a big impact on candidate performance depending on who the interviewer is, because you get very good interviewers who know what probes to ask, and then you get others sort of not so skilled interviewers who will just sort of take the first answer as golden and not probe, and then that sort of leads to a not as equitable process as it could be as such. Would you agree with that?
Exactly. There's so many variables, I think, right? And and even down to the interviewer's day that they've had, right? Whether it be whether they've been stuck in traffic for 2 hours on the M25, or they've had a really smooth journey, or or whatever. So yeah, I totally agree.
Right. Do you think that having a robust EDI strategy can help future-proof the organisation?
Yes, I think absolutely. I think it has to. Going forward, I think any business isn't doing that. It's probably naive. It's jobs to your existing population that these are things that you care about, and that's kind of where it starts, and that's where the equity and the inclusivity in particular starts, right? It's feeling what is what's felt in the business currently. I think secondly, more and more job seekers care, in this country anyway. And so again, you need to be clear with what that is. And I think the final part is that if you're not, you're missing out on untapped talent. In terms of you're not thinking about how you can reach those communities. And I'm talking about ED&I quite holistically. I think, sometimes it's not always kind of the visible, kind of the sexy visible thing like ethnicity or gender, and especially in kind of elite spaces, right? So it's not always about board representation or senior leadership representation. It's about kind of reaching how we're bringing people into the business at entry levels as well. So yeah, I think that it's key, and I think that as part of that, what is key is to educate the people inside the business. We spend too much time on the social aspect of it, which resonates with some people, probably resonate with someone like me, potentially resonate with someone like you, but that becomes it's chance whether it resonates with someone. The bit that I think we should lean into much more is the business case for diversity and why it matters, why it will help us make more money, why it will help us be more productive, be more successful, be more creative, get more customers, etc. And I think that's one thing I didn't touch on why it's important is, we talk about consumer brand, employer brand. If you don't have, for a big customer facing business like ours, for example, if you don't have that strategy as an organization, you're at risk of it affecting your consumer reputation as well. But back to that, the point is I think it's really important that we're much clearer with the business case. So we can't be accused of the people that ED&I is important to. We can't be accused of wokery or woke nonsense, etc. But actually, there's enough kind of empirical evidence to suggest there is a strong business case for doing this, and we'll all make more money. We'll have better bonuses. We'll have a greater share price, etc. And then if you're not brought into that, then the question is, are you in the right organisation, right?
Yeah, 100%. 100%. It's what diversity of thought gives you, isn't that?
Yeah.
Are you seeing, and obviously I fully appreciate the nature of the supply chain element of the business, but are you seeing a change in candidate sort of, I'd say demand, but I'm going to stick with demand. Do you see sort of a lot of questions at the moment around remote working as a model, or is it sort of not really an argument or a request that comes in on a daily basis, just given the nature of your work?
I think that, yes, so you're right that certain jobs in the supply chain centre need to be done, or most jobs there need to be done. And obviously in support office, I think there is a greater expectation for some flexibility. I think that as an organisation, we're not fully remote, and we don't plan to be. So I guess a short answer is yes. There is a candidate expectation now that there is a degree of flexibility around that. But there is a spectrum of what people expect that flexibility to be, right? My view on it, and this is again not the organisation's view, but mine is, I think an organisation, as long as it's transparent and honest from the start and doesn't kind of flip-flop and change once people are in the door, I think an organisation has the right to decide what expectations they have around people's time in the office and working from home. And then there is decisions and trade-offs to make across that, right? So I think that if an organisation wants people in the office 5 days a week, then they have that right. What they will gain in their perception of productivity, in creation of a company culture, in engagement, I think it's hard to argue that some of those will increase. They will lose in access to talent, right? Certain people won't be in the office 5 days a week. You'll create a catchment area which is much smaller. So what you will lose on is certain types of talent. If you've got the other end of the spectrum, if you want to create a fully remote organisation, you'll have a work anywhere type model. You'll have your talent pool will be massive, but actually how you engage and onboard people and that sort of thing. Yeah, you might be able to pay people less. Yeah, so you might save some money there, but then so you can invest that back in some sort of away days and engagement to kind of create that. So it's about your choice of organisation, I think. And I think for me a frustrating thing is you see it on LinkedIn quite a lot. Just kind of companies have to offer work from home. They have to offer remote working, etc. And or hybrid working, whatever. The truth is they don't have to, but they have to appreciate that the challenges or the pitfalls that will come with each of the kind of scales or like kind of ramp up and ramp down that they do of those options, right? Because I think there's an entitlement. I think there's entitlement to be able to work from home, but again, I think things like onboarding becomes difficult. I think again, the value of being in the office is greater when you're more junior. Yeah. But I think a statistic suggests that it's that kind of Gen Z. Anyone I know, Gen Z gets battered around quite a lot. But they're typically, because they've never worked in that 5 day week office environment, they're the types of people that are typically resistant to being in the office. But I would say, again, from personal experience, so much of what I learned especially in the first few years of my career, just from osmosis of just being around people, doing some of the jobs to me, being able to ask a question with someone just sitting next to you rather than it being set up as a Teams call or
hearing other people on the phone.
Exactly.
And approach senior stakeholders, that sort of thing.
Absolutely. So I think there is value in that.
That's all my questions, Thilina. Thank you so much.